What up, everybody? At the end of season 2, we were introduced to a new Mexican cartel called the Marquez Cartel. Marquez Cartel rep Roberto Ortega was meeting with Mirkovic to discuss becoming the Serbs' new supplier after they were cut off by Che and the Estrada Cartel. During the meeting between Mirkovic and Roberto Ortega, Mirkovic mentioned that the Marquez Cartel had been wanting to plant their flag in Chicago. But up until this point, they hadn't been able to because the two biggest distros in the city, Miguel and his gang, the Insane Princes, and the Serbs, were both being supplied by the Estrada Cartel. Mirkovic also told Roberto Ortega that he guaranteed he would make him more money in Chicago than he ever made in Detroit. So this lets us know that the Marquez Cartel already has their flag planted in Detroit. When Mirkovic made that guarantee, Ortega warned him not to make any promises that he's not prepared to back up, that the consequences could be dire. Then once Claudia Flynn joined their conversation, when she told Ortega that they could pay for the first two jobs up front, he then doubled down on his warning. A couple things in regards to Roberto Ortega. Notice he's significantly younger than someone like Che, who's in the same position as Ortega as the cartel rep for the Estrada Cartel. He also had a backwards hat on and a tattoo on his neck. So while Che's more about business, it seems like Ortega's more street, being younger than Che, and the threats he made show that the Marquez Cartel has no problem with violence, as Ortega even had a scar on his face. While I don't think Che necessarily has a problem with violence, it's obviously not his first choice in how to handle things. Ortega was ultimately arrested during his drug deal with Claudia Flynn and Mirkovic, when Tommy played Vic Flynn by giving him Claudia's meeting time and location and letting him think it was CBI's meet with Che. And when Che saw the video footage at the end of season 2, Che was pissed off and told Tommy that he risked a war between the Marquez and Estrada cartels. But Tommy promised Che that their fingerprints was nowhere near this, and because of that, Che made CBI his distro, replacing the Serbs. When Che cut off Mirkovic and the Serbs, he said that the Estrada Cartel had been supplying the Serbs for the last 20 years. So that means the Estrada Cartel had been doing business with the Serbs since the early 2000s. Now going back to OG Power and how Tommy was in business with the Serbs, this means that even at the point when Tommy was in business with the Serbs, Jason Michik and Milan, that he was indirectly a customer of the Estrada Cartel, because Tommy was obviously doing business with Jason and Milan within that 20-year window. Tommy and Ghost were originally both forced to go to work with Milan after killing his New York distro, Vladimir. At one point, Milan even warned Ghost not to think he would just be able to kill him like he did Lobos to get free, because unlike Lobos, his organization wouldn't die with him. And Ghost even told Tasha concerning Milan that he might be the most dangerous man he ever met. Milan oversaw the New York territory for the Serbs, and after Ghost and Tommy killed Milan, Tommy replaced Milan as the New York Connect and started working directly under Milan's boss, Jason Michik, who was based out of Chicago, with the Serbs having more power in Chicago than they do in New York. And either though, like Che, Jason didn't necessarily have a problem with violence, it wasn't his first choice how to handle things, believing that bodies were bad for business. So Jason was more about taking care of business than anything else. It wasn't viewed to be as dangerous as Milan. Something else to keep in mind about OG Power when Tommy was doing business with the Serbs is that he wasn't just moving coke. Milan also forced Tommy and his premiers to start selling pills as well. So because we haven't heard anything about the Estrada Cartel or any other cartel being in the pill business, this makes me think because Jason was in Chicago and more of a businessman, I think that he had worked out an arrangement with Walter Flynn to move pills for him. So in OG Power, Tommy and Ghost to a lesser extent, because his time working for Milan was relatively short, they might have been moving pills that was ultimately coming from Walter Flynn. Then in one of the last episodes of Power, Ghost ended up killing Jason, and something I really haven't brought up like that is that left Tommy without a plug at that point. So we already know that Tommy left town because of it not being safe after killing Benny Savello, and then he faked his death to evade law enforcement. But with Tommy, if he had a plug he was working for, he might have never left town in the first place or agreed to fake his death. But Tommy felt like there was nothing left for him in New York anymore. So because of that, where was Tommy headed before going to Chicago? To L.A., where he knew Rudolfo Ramirez. And when Tommy got to Chicago, Tatiana, Milan's lady, was now running things in Chicago before she was killed by Tommy, and Mirkovic flew in from Serbia. Diamond told Tommy if Mirkovic had to come to town, that means things were all the way f***ed up. But unlike Jason, who Che probably had a very good relationship with, seeing how much alike they were, Mirkovic is extremely violent, and when the Serbs burnt down the Crimson projects, that was the last straw and why Che ended up cutting them off. But now going back to OG Power again, Jason and the Serbs had beef with the most dominant cartel from that time, the Jimenez cartel, ultimately having Tommy break Alicia out of jail just so he could cap her. So now that we know that Jason was connected to the Estrada cartel, I wonder if Jason killing Alicia was ultimately a business move to help Che and the Estrada cartel take more control and power in Mexico. Because either though the Estrada cartel has been around for a minimum of 20 years, the two most dominant cartels from the OG Power timeline was Lobos and the Jimenez cartel. Neither the Estrada or Marquez cartel were ever mentioned in Power. Matter of fact, in Season 5, when the Jimenez were finally arrested, Steve Tampio showed up and let the Jimenez out of jail. Part of the reasoning behind this was because after Lobo's death, the Jimenez cartel had taken complete control of the border, and the U.S. government knew if the Jimenez cartel were taken off the board, that there would be cartel wars over control over the border, and they wanted to avoid that if they could, even if it meant letting Alicia and Diego walk away free at the time. And once Alicia was actually taken into custody, we saw exactly how dangerous the Jimenez cartel was when they began coming for Dre. But the thing about the Jimenez cartel is that they used to have cards as their trademark when they killed people. And ironically enough, when Tommy found the stash of coke that Liliana stole from the Serbs in Season 1, it was tagged with cards very similar to what the Jimenez cartel used, but it was never revealed what that was all about. But obviously, once the Jimenez and Lobos were taken off the board, it was the Estrada cartel who became more powerful. And also, the Marquez cartel started to make a name for themselves as well. And like I said, with Roberto Ortega being younger, they might have started out as a Mexican gang before they became a cartel. And because this is a younger cartel, they're likely a lot more wild and potentially even more dangerous than the Estrada cartel. Getting me to the Season 3 trailer and Stacy Marks saying that there's a street war going on between the Marquez cartel and CBI. So either though Tommy said CBI's hands were clean when it came to Roberto Ortega getting arrested, something's going to happen to cause a war anyway. And if the Marquez cartel is determined to plant their flag in Chicago, that also means they could be gunning for Che and the Estradas as well as CBI. But like I said the other day, now that we know that Tommy will split with CBI this season, we got to question whose side is Tommy actually going to be on during this war. Does Tommy actually start the war after teaming up with the Marquez cartel? Like he said, CBI's fingerprints wasn't on Ortega getting arrested, so they might not even know about that. And Tommy could convince the Marquez cartel that the only way they're going to be able to plant their flag in Chicago is by taking CBI off the board. And there you have it. Leave your thoughts, theories, and predictions in the comments.